Now, the people of Britain are, we're told by our government, thrilled that Egypt has moved from dictatorship to a form of imperfect democracy. Yet our government doesn't seem to be putting its money where its mouth is, or rather, it's not putting the money stolen by the dictator where its mouth is. Once a self-respecting kleptomaniac has everything sorted at home, any opposition quieted, a satisfactory number of swarthy men equipped with toenail extractors, he seeks a comfortable bolt hole and a shelter for his loot. For Hosni Mubarak, that was what London offered. As Tim Huell reports, we don't seem to be in a rush to track it all down.
They wanted bread, they wanted freedom, but they also wanted their money back. Reports of the tens of billions of dollars their dictator Hosni Mubarak and his friends had allegedly stolen from Egypt drove the revolutionaries on Tahrir Square last year into a white heat of fury. After the revolution, Britain was one of the first countries to propose freezing that wealth, exciting great hopes in Egypt.
We have also received a request from the Egyptian government to freeze the assets of several former Egyptian officials. We will, of course, cooperate with this request. If there is any evidence of illegality or misuse of state assets, we will take firm and prompt action.
But a year and a half on, not a penny's been returned. Egypt's so angry, it's suing Britain, a country it now believes is willfully concealing its billions.
We are in Egypt, but our money is in the UK. How can we get it back if Britain won't cooperate?
Mubarak's billions, they believe, are somewhere here. It's no secret that London's one of the places the Egyptian elite most likes to keep and to conceal their wealth. Yet the UK's frozen a mere £85 million worth of assets linked to Hosni Mubarak and his associates. Is that, as many believe, just a fraction of the ill-gotten gains hidden here? And if so, why has Britain been so slow to trace the rest of the money? Its apparent inaction proved by documents Newsnight was able to obtain within minutes online. Those clues led us through one of the Egyptian elite's most favoured haunts, London's Belgravia, to assets the UK authorities have either ignored or failed to discover. 28 Wilton Place, conveniently round the corner from Harrods, was the much-loved London home of President Mubarak's younger son, Gamal, playboy, businessman, deputy head of the ruling party. His name was prominent on the list of Egyptians whose assets were frozen last year. But this very substantial asset, worth around £10 million, wasn't subject to that order. The land registry title shows it belongs formally to a firm in the tax haven of Panama. The reason, perhaps, there's no reference here to any freezing order, though the sanction should apply to any property the named individual benefits from, regardless of legal ownership. Just round the corner, the former office of Medinvest Associates, an investment company belonging to a Cypriot firm Gamal Mubarak was involved with. A Companies House document, easily available online, shows it dissolved itself voluntarily in February this year. It had continued to operate for 11 months after sanctions were imposed.
On 7487, any business activities. So, I mean, it's about as vague as it can be, isn't it?
Tim Daniel, one of the city's leading asset tracers, is astonished. He's a lawyer who hunts down dirty money worldwide. He helped Nigeria recover millions stolen by its dictator, Sani Abacha. What does he make of the documents from Gamal's former company, Medinvest Associates?
Whoever lodged this document has put a note saying, in addition to the two activities, software company, etc., they also were involved in providing advice on credit and borrowing from financial institutions. So there you are. You've got an active business through which Gamal was presumably trading. Then you might have thought that the company would be added to the list of entities affected by the sanctions, but that hasn't happened.
A further short walk prompted by another very simple web search, brings me to a third asset that's escaped the freeze, linked to another prominent Egyptian on the sanctions list. This company's house entry shows Nagla al-Ghazali, wife of Mubarak's housing minister, was able to register a new firm at this address 7 months after the freezing order against her.
We find, again, I think rather interestingly, that this company was authorised on the 1st of November last year, and the sanctions list was put out in March last year.
That's extraordinary then. Somebody on the sanctions list, months after the sanction list comes out, is allowed to open a company.
Register a company. I mean, you know, one wonders whether any questions were asked at the company's registry. Well, hang on a minute. You're on the sanctions list. What are you doing? Setting up a new company. And this lady is not as if she's, apparently, not as if she's still resident in Cairo, but resident here in Chelsea.
What's the reason for the inaction? One problem is that it's not always clear in Britain who's responsible for tracing stolen assets from abroad, or what should trigger such action. When the Treasury freezes foreign assets, it's up to the banks and other financial institutions to implement the order, though they were heavily criticised last year by the Financial Services Authority for often failing to do so. Further police investigation normally only comes in response to a request for mutual legal assistance, or MLA, from the country that's trying to recover the assets, and those requests have to be quite specific. But is the UK, which has all the expertise and resources to trace money, simply using the law as an excuse to do nothing, not even to freeze funds, which should require a lower burden of proof than confiscating or returning them? On the Nile, they can't understand why Britain's asking Egypt, recovering from decades of dictatorship, to provide the leads in this investigation, why it's parrying Cairo's many requests for help with demands for more information. Britain, citing data protection laws, won't even tell Assem Al-Gohari, responsible for recovering stolen assets, what money it's already frozen. Now he's taking the UK government to court in London to try to find out.
The British government is obliged by law to help us, but it doesn't want to make any effort at all to recover the money. It just says, give us evidence. Is that reasonable? We are in Egypt. How can we search for money in the UK?
Surprisingly, there's another country that's certainly stirring itself to implement those agreements. A country where you might least expect movement to recover ill-gotten gains. A country burdened with a terrible reputation for concealing them. Switzerland, long known for the discretion of its bankers, as the perfect place for dictators and tycoons to squirrel away their assets, is now trying to reinvent itself as a model of financial integrity, as a world leader in the hunt for dirty money. Switzerland's federal government, a traditionally weak institution, is using all its power to change the country's image.
And we also published a communiqué, press release.
Its chief agent in the struggle is Valentin Zellweger of the Foreign Ministry.
You'll find it on our website.
Immediately after President Mubarak was overthrown, on the 11th of February last year, he activated a decree freezing the assets of the dictator and those around him, 37 days before Britain and the rest of the EU took a similar step.
I was sitting here, and when I heard the news that President Mubarak had left his palace in Cairo, I had a phone call with the president of Switzerland, because she had the power to freeze the money that may have been here in Switzerland, and we could then act within half an hour. The money was effectively frozen in Switzerland.
Within half an hour of
Yes.
Mubarak leaving his presidential palace?
Yes, within half an hour.
Since then, Switzerland, with more than 20 investigators on the case, has doubled the amount of money frozen here. On the day Mubarak fell, Switzerland froze the equivalent of £270 million in Egyptian assets. That's now risen to £470 million. In the UK, a much smaller amount, 85 million, hasn't increased since last year. The Foreign Office says it's doing what it can to help Egypt, but UK law is different to Swiss law, and there are many legal problems.
We have a duty both to the people who ostensibly own the money as well as to those who are pursuing it. And we've got to make sure that, that proper legal processes have been gone through so that a decision ultimately made is just and right. We will trace assets and we will return assets when it's legally right to do so. We have no vested interest in doing anything else.
The government says it can't help if the necessary information from Egypt isn't forthcoming.
We have been proactive in trying to help the Egyptian authorities understand what they need to do to identify and find things.
But recovering Egypt's stolen wealth isn't only about justice, it's about development. The revolution hasn't ended the country's festering social inequalities, but Mubarak's millions might.
Every day they ask me, are we getting back our money? Are the West going to steal our money and keep it in their banks?
Britain says it's doing a lot to support Egypt's fragile new democracy. It's the largest foreign direct investor in the country. But that doesn't solve the issue, they say here, of promises not kept.
We are disappointed by Mr. Cameron, but disappointed by our government also. But we think that Mr. Cameron can do a lot for us. If they have the political will to do it, they will help us and it will come back. If they don't have the political will, they will use this kind of legal procedures and so on to do nothing.
That was Tim Huell reporting.